Okay, so let's look at the programming project, part 1 and part 2. Programming project 2, part 1 has you create some functions. And then from these functions, we're going to use these to build the game. And this really won't take that long. Okay, what I'm doing right now is just some setup that'll just make this a little easier. So we're going to have this angle mode degrees, and that's just going to make the rest of the program easier. So one of the main things I want you to get away from this is how you can create your own functions in programming. So let's start by creating some text. So I'm going to write the word text, and then in single quotes, I'm going to write hello, and I'm going to put this in the middle of the screen. Now you see the text hello here in the middle. Okay. But now let's say we wanted to create a variable. I'm going to call it variable text. I can't use the word text. I'm going to variable Bob. I'm going to say that variable Bob equals. So now for my text, I'm going to put hello. I'm going to write the variable Bob at 200, 200. Note it says 20 here in the middle. And that 20 comes from the variable Bob. Bob is 20. We're writing the text of Bob. So what appears is not the word Bob, but the number 20, because that's the variable. If I create another variable called Alice and called that 30, and I created the text Alice at 200, 300, I see the number 30 down here because that's where I said Alice to go. The format for text is you write text, the thing you want to display. So that could be a variable, in which if it's a variable, it'll display the output of the variable. If it's in quotes, like if I put this in quotes, it'll say the word Bob because now it's writing the text Bob because it's in quotes. The 200 is the X position. So as X increases, that increases the x-axis here. And the second number is on the y-axis, but the y-axis is a little different because in the coding, this is 0, 0, and this is the y value increases as you go down. So that's the opposite of a graph. And I haven't found an easy way to make this more like the coordinate plane you would use on graph paper or something. So the assignment criteria. It says create a function called myFirstFunctionX that will take a number and add 5 to it. Okay. So I'm going to then, to create my first function, I'm going to write the word function and call it myFirstFunction. And then in parentheses, I'm going to put X. When I've written this, I'm telling the environment that it's a function. That's what writing the word function does. Then you type in the name of the function. It's called myFirstFunction. I've got to spell it right though. In parentheses, I put in what are the inputs. It's going to have one input, which is I'm going to call X. And then in curly brackets, I describe what the function does. So here I have a function, myFirstFunction, takes in an input X and then does something, but I haven't described what it does yet. Note, looking back at the assignment, I'm going to create a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 functions. So I'm going to get those all ready to go. myFirstFunctionX, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now they're not all going to be called myFirstFunction, but now I have all the, this is going to make my work much faster when I start doing the other ones. So let's just get all the names right, and then we can get to work on making them all do something. So one of them is called myFirstFunction. One of them is going to be called my sine of x and my cosine of x. My sine of x, cosine of x. What are the other functions called? My add. That my add takes in two inputs, x comma y. And then the last two were my x side and my y side. My x side that had two inputs, and my y side. This name is has a capital S unlike the assignment, but this is more appropriate. So my first function of x will take in a number and output 5 more than that. So what it does is it's going to return. If I don't type in this word return, it's going to add the 5, but it's not going to give it back to you. So I'm not going to be able to tell what it did. So it's going to return whatever this input number was plus 5. And that's all you have to do. So if I type in now for text, note that here again, this is Alice, but Alice is actually 30. So what happens if I type in my first function of, say, 5? Note out here we see 10. And if I type in here my first function of 10, right here we see 15. Because the number right here, this is my first function of 10. But what is my first function? My first function is a thing that takes in the input, which in this case is the number 10, and adds 5 to it. What do you think would happen if I put in a word here in quotes? If I put in hello, let's kind of try to do hello plus 5, which it means is hello 5. That's how JavaScript works. If you add a number to a word, it just sticks that number onto the end of the word. But if I put in the number 0, we would expect out 5 more than that. Okay. My sine of x is going to take in a number and give you the sign of that number. So I'm going to return math.sine of x. This is something that's built in math.sine, but we want to know that we can use a function to our own function to do whatever we want. So if I did my sine of 30 degrees, this degree mode does not seem to be working right now. Math.sine. Maybe I have to do with angle mode degrees here. Sine of 30 degrees should be 1/2. That's why I'm a little surprised. All right, well, this is actually the same problem we came to in class. So what we did is we converted degrees here. So to convert from radians to degrees, which is what's going on here, we're going to type in math.sine of x times math.pi over 180. Right. And then the function my cosine is going to return math.cosine times the number times x, the input, times math.pi over 180. So what this does is it's going to be very useful in a little bit, but it allows us to convert from radians to degrees. And a lot of times sine and cosine is done in radians, which is easier to do when you're working with circles, but we're trying to work with triangles. So that's why we want to do this thing here. It's not that important to actually understand what's going on here, but that we can make our own function that's going to make these things easier to work with. So when we're working with sine and cosine, we're going to use my sine of x because that's going to take in degrees, or my cosine of x because that's going to input degrees. So this is just an easy way to start working in degrees, which is what we want. Just like on the calculator, you want to make sure you're in degrees mode and not radian mode. We've done that on our own. Okay. There's going to be a function my add x of y, but note here we can take in two inputs, x and y. So we're going to return plus y. So now up here, if I do my add, say, and put in like 2 and 3, I would expect to get out 5. And I do, I get out 5 here. If I put in 10 and 20, I will expect to get out 30. And I do. So we can create functions with multiple inputs that has a one output. So here it takes an x and y and returns the sum of x and y. Function my x side and my y side are things we're going to actually use. And this is going to be if you have a triangle with the first number being the hypotenuse of that triangle and the second number being the angle, what is the x coordinate based side of that triangle? So what this is going to be is x times the my sine of y. Oops, sorry, that's going to be my cosine. And then my y side will be the height of a triangle with hypotenuse x and angle y. Turn x comma sine of y. Okay. So this completes the first assignment. We have these functions that we're going to then use because they're going to be very useful in a minute. Okay. So now the second thing was to start building this game. This game is composed of some sliders that is going to move a line around, and that's going to determine the angle and power of a projectile that's going to be fired. So let's get that going. So this didn't work, so we're going to get rid of that. So we're going to create a setup thing, which is going to be our angle slider. And we're going to create a slider. Goes from, and we're going to put in 3 numbers here. These 3 numbers are going to be the minimum, maximum, and default value. So we want a slider that say that goes from 0 to 50 and starts at 25. I need to check the reference to make sure I'm making the slider correctly because sometimes I forget. I'll create slider. So here's a slider here. It's a thing I can move in down. So this would indicate it's a value of 0 because that's the first number here is the minimum value. If I max it all the way out, that'll be a value of 50. Okay, so this is 0, this is 50. And I also want, but it's an angle, I probably want an angle to go between 0 degrees and 90 degrees. I also want something that's power, the power, my slider. Power, I don't want to go up to 90, I want it to say to go up to 20. And that seems to be the most enough power for most students in the class. So I have an angle slider. This is an angle between 0 degrees and 90 degrees. And this is the strength of my projectile between 0 and 20 with a default of 10. Okay. So I have these things here. And now I'm gonna start drawing this by having a little line that starts here and extends based on the angle and power that I've selected. So I'm going to create a line. When you create a line in JavaScript, it's 4 inputs. It's the x and y coordinate of the first one end of the line segment, and then the x and y coordinate of the second of the line segment. So one of the coordinates is going to be, ends of the segment is going to be right here in this bottom corner. And that's at point 0, 400. Second coordinate is going to be based on, again, the angle and the power. So this is going to be at 0 plus, and I'm doing 0. I don't necessarily have to have the 0 here, but I'm just going to put it there in case we want to change this number later. Plus the my x side, the function we created earlier, and this inputs the angle. The first number here is the power, so the power slider dot value, and then the angle slider dot value. just going to do this a bit differently. So our power is the power slider height, and the angle is the angle. So then the line, this is the my x side, power angle, and then my y side, power. Angle slider angler. Oh, again, this is at 400 miles. So now, by extending this, I'm actually going to make this number a bit bigger. I'm going to turn this down to 100. Okay, now I can have this line grow, and by adjusting the slider, I can change the angle of this line. So you might want to pause here and make sure you got this correctly. So just again to repeat, this adjusts the angle. This slider adjusts a variable called angle slider. Angle slider is then used to create a variable angle. This angle is fed into this my x side and my y side functions that we created to get the value of the side of a triangle. So this basically is like the hypotenuse of a triangle, and that's what we're figuring out here. And this slider here is the length of the hypotenuse of this triangle. We then want to create a button that's going to fire a projectile. So I'm going to look here in the reference how to create a button. So I'm going to look for the word button, and here's this thing, create button. So I'm going to do this button, create button, and then when button.mouse pressed, I can create a new function that does something. So in my setup, I'm going to do a button, create button. I'm going to call the button fire. And then I'm going to, on mouse pressed, something's going to happen. When I press the mouse button, it's going to look for a function called fire. No such function yet exists, so I have to create it. Function fire. It takes no input to that function. I have to tell it what to do here. So first, I'm going to create a projectile. A projectile is just a circle, but it's going to move. That circle is going to have some properties to it, and we're going to create those properties up here before we start. So the circle is going to have a x position. That means its location in space. It's going to start at 0. That circle is going to have a x velocity, at how fast it's going to be moving. The circle is going to have a y position, and the circle is going to have a y velocity. This also takes place like on Earth, so we're going to have some gravity, and the gravity is going to start at 0, but we might change it later when we hit the fire button. So that's when things start happening. So what we're going to draw our projectile. It's going to be a circle. Its location is going to be x position, y position, and then the radius of the circle, and we'll have a circle with radius 10. In the x position, and we're going to start at 0. The y is actually going to start at 400 because that's the bottom of this left of the screen right there, and we can see a little circle showing up there. We then want to program in some physics. The way physics works basically, I'm going to put this here after background, is that the x velocity, and again, the draw function repeats it every frame, so 60 times per second. And every time it's going to want to recalculate what is the new velocity and the new position for this projectile. So the x velocity is always going to be what it was before. So this may seem redundant, but you'll see that when we do the y velocity, it's going to change a little bit. The y velocity is going to be whatever it was before, but we're going to add in a little bit of gravity, which is going to change the motion over time. So once gravity is a value, it's going to change the arc that this projectile has. The x position is going to be the previous x position plus the x velocity. So this is going to have it change over time. The y position is going to be the y position as it was before, plus the y velocity. So then if there's a velocity, it's going to start moving. Now, right now, it's not moving at all because all these values are set to 0. So when we press the fire button, those values are going to become something more interesting. So I'm going to copy these and paste them down in the fire, because when we click fire, we're going to change these values. The y velocity and x velocity are suddenly going to become something more interesting. So what if we made the x velocity 1 and the y velocity 1 when we clicked fire? Nothing seems to be happening. Just to make sure the button is working, because if I put this print hello, I should see the word hello appear in the console when I click this. So that is working. So why am I not seeing the projectile start moving? Its x position, its x velocity should be set to 1 when I click fire. My spelling x velocity is 1. So these are 0 when I click fire. They should no longer be 0. Okay. It doesn't want these bars. Okay, that worked. I'm not sure why. We don't want those variables there. So I'm going to set this here because that was going too fast. And here, because this is somewhat inverted, we want this to be a minus. And the gravity here will be a minus 2. So now when I click fire, we can see that there's a pretty good arc. I want to get rid of the print because we don't need those numbers printing at the bottom. It's making things go a little slow. So we shoot this and the ball arcs. We can also get rid of these texts. Now we don't want to have fixed values because right now we've just had the set values of 10 and 10 for the x velocity and y velocity. Gravity we might want to make a little bit weaker because it's kind of moving faster than we want. Maybe something like this. And we'll have these x velocity and y velocity come not from these values, but from our slider. So we have to for reasons that are hard to explain, I redefine what the power is. The power, again, is the power slider dot value. And the angle is the angle slider dot value. And then our x velocity, well, that comes from my x side. This is my x side of the power and the angle. The y velocity comes from my y side of the power. Now our power is quite strong, and it's too large a value. It's going to make things move too fast, so I'm going to put 0.1 times the power slider value here to make sure these values aren't so large that the projectile goes faster than we can see. So here I'm going to click fire, and then it should go in the right angle. So if I point it up, it shoots up. Beautiful. Okay, I'm now going to, it's not shooting quite as hard as I want at maximum power. So I'm going to adjust this number. Instead of 0.1, I'll have it 0.2 so that at full power, it'll shoot pretty hard. Maybe that's still too much. Maybe this should be 0.1. All right, the last thing is to make a target. So I'm going to create two new variables. One variable called target x. I'm going to put that at 200, and a variable called target y. Put that at 200. That's going to be the location of a target. I'm going to draw the target as a circle in our draw function. So we're going to have a circle, target x, target y, and I'll make it a big circle with a radius of 30. So there's our target. And I want something to happen when we hit it. So right now, see, I can aim, fire, and I should have hit it there, but we haven't coded in anything to happen when you hit the target. So we're going to do that now with an if statement. So if, and what is actually happening when the ball is touching the target? It means that their distance between the projectile and the target is very close. So that's what we want to use here is the distance formula, which we learned about this year. The distance function takes in 4 numbers, the x and y coordinates of the first object and the x and y coordinates of the second. So if x position and y position, that's the projectile, and x target, target x, target y. If the distance between those 2 points is less than, say, 30, which is the radius of the second circle, then we want to do something. We might want to write the text win and put that maybe in the middle. And then we might want to freeze the game. And a way to freeze the game is to change the frame rate to 0. Frame rate to 0. Instead of 60, which it normally is, it's going to now be 0. So if I do this, name it here. If I hit the target, it's going to freeze the game, say you win, and everything will stop. Almost got it. There, it says you win, and the game is frozen. This will qualify as completing the assignment, but I'm hoping you could think of something interesting to add. Some people have, when you hit the target, it moves and you have to hit it 5 times. Some people have made confetti fall. Some have 2 players. There are many things you can do, and really it's whatever you can imagine doing, you can probably find a way to do it.